We shall move to questions without notice and give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, what is the total cost of the government's energy plan and what will the capacity investment scheme cost taxpayers?
Order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting before the Prime Minister begins his answer. Order. The member for Bennelong will cease interjecting. Give the call. The member for Bruce will leave the chamber under 94A. We're not off to a good start. Every time before a minister will answer a question, including the Prime Minister, there will be silence. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, you've got to hand it to the Leader of the Opposition. At a time when the rest of us are working to get power bills down, he's picked the one option guaranteed to push power prices up.
Order.
Push power prices up. The economics of nuclear do not stack up. That doesn't worry those opposite. They spent a decade in power without a single surplus and then left Australia with $1 trillion of debt.
Order.
But the Leader of the Opposition is offering a blank piece of paper, demanding a blank cheque to pay for it. Demanding a blank cheque. 3 days of questions.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Leader of the Opposition will raise his point of order.
Mr Speaker, the question was very tight, deliberately so. Under the standing orders, if the Prime Minister doesn't know the answer, he could take it on notice. He could come back and provide advice. But I seek your ruling in relation to relevance as to whether the Prime Minister is being relevant to the very tight question he was asked, which was, what is the total system cost of the government's energy plan and what will the capacity investment scheme cost taxpayers?
Yeah, the Prime Minister has had about 45 seconds of a preamble, but he's not entitled to base his answer just about the opposition's policy because that was order. I don't need sound effects. The Prime Minister is going to have to return to the government's energy policy, not just talk about the opposition's policies. He has the call.
We do have a plan on this side of the House. It's a plan that's been legislated. A plan for net zero by 2050. A plan for a 43% reduction by 2030. The capacity investment scheme to drive investment in renewables. The safeguard mechanism that was thought of by former Minister Greg Hunt, but which we have legislated as well. And the reason why we have done that is because we know that the cheapest form of new energy is renewables. And Mr Speaker, Australia is home to some of the greatest sources of renewable energy in the world. Sunshine,
Order.
wind,
the Leader of the Nationals, the
and the Leader of the Opposition's anger and negativity. A great source of renewable energy, Mr Speaker, that has no end, that's used every single day. We saw it when last week he made an announcement and then 3 days later he just gave a speech to the Liberal Party Council full of abuse.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. We're going to hear the Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting. We'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, Standing Order 91C, a member's conduct is disorderly if they wilfully refuse to conform to a standing order. You rightly directed the Prime Minister on relevance earlier, but is continuing to flout your ruling.
Well, let me just give the House some assistance. If everyone could just take down the temperature on this issue, on this question, it'll enable me to hear the Prime Minister. He knows he can't talk about simply. He can do some comparing and contrasting regarding his energy plan, but I'm going to listen carefully to make sure that he sticks to the question that he was asked about.
And our plan is working. We've seen We've seen a 25% increase in renewables in the grid, Mr Speaker. The highest uptake in the world of rooftop solar, record investment in batteries and storage, and wholesale power prices that have dropped almost $300 a megawatt hour since we came to office. Almost $300 per megawatt hour. We've already added 8.5 gigawatts. They can't say how many gigawatts. They can't say how many reactors. They can't say how much gigawatts. And more than 50 renewable projects have been approved, enough to power 3 million homes.
Order. Members on my left, when the House comes to order, the member for Deakin will cease interjecting and the Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to ease cost of living pressures? How will this action help Australian households, and what approaches have been rejected?
Call to the Treasurer.
Speaker, I'm certain I speak for the whole parliament when I say how wonderful it is to have the member for Gilmore back here on deck, fighting fit and fighting for her community on the south coast of New South Wales, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, tax cuts for every Australian taxpayer to help with the cost of living are now just 1 week away. Now, these are the tax cuts that those opposite said they would roll back. These are the tax cuts that the Leader of the Opposition called for an election over. These are the tax cuts which mean an extra $36 a week on average, or for households with kids an extra $63 a week. Now, next Monday, Mr Speaker, we'll bring 5 different kinds of cost of living help from the budget, Mr Speaker. A tax cut for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, cheaper medicines, a pay rise for millions of workers on awards, and 2 extra weeks of paid parental leave for new parents, Mr Speaker. All of this begins from next week, from the 1st of July. And that's because we know that people are under pressure. We'll see that in the inflation numbers later this week. And we also know that some of this pressure is felt at the checkout. And that's why we're making the Food and Grocery Code mandatory. It's why we've got bigger penalties for supermarkets who do the wrong thing, and it's why we've got better avenues for people to make complaints and have them resolved, Mr Speaker. Our changes to the Food and Grocery Code are all about a fair go for farmers and families, all about ensuring that supermarkets do the right thing by their suppliers and by their customers, and part of our broader efforts to make our supermarkets more competitive. This is how you manage the economy in a responsible and a methodical way, Mr Speaker, and here the contrast couldn't be clearer. Because you don't get cost of living down in the 2020s by building nuclear reactors in the second half of the 2030s, Mr Speaker, and that's why the Leader of the Opposition's nuclear shambles is economic insanity. It will take longer, it will push up prices, it will cost more, it will create investor uncertainty, and it will squander the vast economic and industrial opportunities that we have as a nation in the context of the global net zero transformation, Mr Speaker. This is the risk posed by those opposite in our energy markets and in our economy. And as the inspired appointment made earlier today, Mr Speaker, shows, our approach to renewable energy is the mainstream view of sensible people on both sides of the political divide. The Leader of the Opposition's view on nuclears is risky extremism at its worst, and that's why it's falling down all around him, Mr Speaker. We were managing the economy in a responsible and methodical way. That means rolling out cost of living help, fighting inflation and repairing the budget without smashing the economy, and our tax cuts from Monday and our new Food and Grocery Code are part of that effort.
In response to the member for Gilmore's question, I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Just very quickly on indulgence, I just wanted to extend, on behalf of the Coalition, all the very best to the member for Gilmore. Welcome her back, and glad to see that she's healthy and back in this place.
Give the call to the member for Fairfax. Order. Members on my right.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And my question goes to the Prime Minister. The Princeton University's Net Zero Australia report has modelled the capital cost of the energy transition according to a similar pathway to the government's current plan, with a cost of between $1.3 and $1.5 trillion. Prime Minister, what is the total system cost of the government's plan?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question, and I note the report that the member refers to, and they have been referring to it, also makes comments about nuclear energy, and they say that it doesn't stack up and it should be ruled out. It says don't do it. As any rational person who's looked at what Australia's energy needs and what the opportunities we have are, because, as I said, we have these great renewable energy resources. We have solar, we have wind, we have the anger of the Leader of the Opposition, who made an announcement last Wednesday and then had a meltdown on Saturday. Meltdown on Saturday, Mr Speaker. And no wonder he's melting down, because one of the things that this reflects is the fact that since the election in 2022, the lesson learnt by those opposite is that they're not right-wing enough, that they're not in enough climate change denial, they're not sceptical enough, and they're not against market-based mechanisms enough. Because what they have done is come out with a position which mainstream Liberals oppose. That's why we worked constructively with the former Perrottet government to make a difference, to put caps on coal, to put caps on gas, to make sure we had the energy price relief plan. That has made a substantial difference. And, Mr Speaker, in 1 week's time, Australians will benefit, every household, from $300 off their energy bills. What those opposite want to do is to do nothing until 2040 and then have higher energy bills.
Order.
And here's what the Australian Energy Market Operator said
the Prime Minister will
had to
pause.
say about costs.
Prime Minister will pause. The member for Fairfax is seeking the call on a point of order.
Yes, point of order, Mr Speaker, is relevance. The question was to the Prime Minister, what is the total system cost of the government's plan? This is going to be his third go at this one.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Resume your seat. The order, members on my right. The Prime Minister was talking about the AMEO report and the cost. They were the words he was using when you took the point of order. So he's definitely being directly relevant. I don't know. I know you would like a number or a figure, but you know, under the standing orders, I don't have the authority to direct the Prime Minister for the answer you'd like, but he's being directly relevant and he'll continue.
No wonder they're struggling with numbers. He can't work out this is question 2 from those opposite. He can't get to 2. You don't have to count your fingers. You can just count your arms or your heads. Either one will do. Either one will do, Mr Speaker. Either one will do. But here's what the Australian Energy Market Operator had to say. Renewable energy generation drove down wholesale prices in the first quarter of 2024, despite higher temperatures pushing up electricity demand. We are increasingly seeing renewable energy records being set, which is a good thing for Australian consumers, as it is key in driving prices down. Mr Speaker, we want lower prices, lower emissions. They want higher emissions and higher prices. That is the difference between the two approaches in this chamber.
Before I call the member for order, I'm pleased to inform that House that joining us in the Distinguished Visitors Gallery is the honourable members from a delegation from Papua New Guinea led by the Speaker of the National Parliament, the Honourable Job Pomat. On behalf of all members, I wish you a warm welcome to Australia and in particular to the House of Representatives. I give the call to the honourable member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government working to fight inflation and provide cost-of-living relief? What has the government ruled out?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, and I thank my friend, the member for Macquarie, for her fantastic question. and I thank her for the work that she does representing her community. That's very much a diverse community, cares very much about the environment and has seen firsthand the impact, the devastating impact indeed, that natural disasters can have, whether it be bushfires or floods. The communities of Macquarie have had both during her time in service. Now, in just 1 week, on July 1, this government will deliver relief for Australians because cost of living is our #1 priority. Firstly, we'll deliver tax cuts for every single Australian taxpayer, not just some. Then $300 in power bill relief for every household, not just some, and $325 for small business. We, of course, will extend the freeze on the costs of PBS medicines, where we, of course, decrease costs from $42.50 down to $30, where we introduce 60-day scripts, all of which have made an enormous difference. But importantly as well, there will be a pay rise in 1 week's time for 2.6 million workers on award wages. We want people to earn more and to keep more of what they earn, Mr Speaker. And in addition to that, we want an extra 2 weeks will be delivered of government-funded paid parental leave. Now, this isn't the beginning of our cost of living help, and it's not the end. It builds on the relief we've provided in our first 2 years. Cheaper childcare, energy bill relief, which has knocked off 3/4 of a percentage point off inflation. Cheaper medicines have already saved 5 million Australians more than $414 million. Now, today we announced new rules to make sure families are getting better prices at the supermarket. Our crackdown on supermarkets will mean they face fines of up to $10 million if they break the code of conduct, making sure that families and farmers get a fair go. Now, while we're working hard to bring costs down and provide relief, the only policy those opposite are pitching is one guaranteed to drive up power bills, a nuclear plan that costs too much and takes too long, a plan for higher power bills for Australians, and a plan to say to business, stop the investment and stop the rollout of renewables. The certainty that the business community have been crying out for will be ripped up by those opposite. The certainty that they need to invest in the infrastructure that will make a difference in driving down emissions and driving down power bills. Those opposite, no wonder they're hiding the costs, because they simply have no answers.
Order.
No answers, just a slogan.
Concluded. The call to the honourable member for Calare.
To the Treasurer. Many residents in our electorates of Calare, Kennedy and in towns and cities across our great country hold real fears that the use of cash in Australia is being phased out and will soon disappear. Will the government support my Keeping Cash Transactions in Australia bill and keep cash king in our nation?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wanted to acknowledge the efforts of the member for Calare in this regard and to thank him for the discussion that we had last time Parliament sat about some of these important issues. Look, we do recognise as a government that many Australians prefer to use cash, and that there have also been substantial shifts in consumer demand over time in how people access cash and how they use banking services. When I released the changes that we're proposing to the payment system, I went out of my way to ensure that people knew that we believe that there is a future for cash in our economy. Even as, over a long period of time, cheques will phase out and all of the rest of it, we acknowledge very explicitly, the Prime Minister and I have acknowledged subsequently, that there is a role for cash in our economy. And I know that this is especially a concern in regional communities like the one that the member for Calare represents, and also, in my experience, often amongst older Australians who become used to using cash over a long period of time. Our focus in the last little while has been working with the banks and with the private sector providers, the supermarkets and with Australia Post and others to make sure that we can continue to keep cash circulating in our economy. The Prime Minister's been engaged, as have I, as has the Assistant Treasurer and others been engaged in this really important question. And in that regard, I wanted to acknowledge and welcome the announcement by the Australian Banking Association, the major banks, the retailers, that they've reached a 12-month agreement with Armaguard for a financial contribution to its cash-in-transit business. This is a good outcome. It's a good thing for Australia while we work out some of these important structural issues in the market. I know that that agreement is subject to approval by the ACCC, but on the face of it, I wanted to take the opportunity to welcome it. So first step is...
The Treasurer will pause and I'll hear from the member for Calare.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question concluded with, will the government support the bill?
That is not a point of order. I know that is the question, but under the standing orders, just as we just had with the opposition question, a simple yes-no will figure. I'm not compelled under the standing orders to ensure that the minister is answering it how you would like, but under the standing orders it's being directly relevant. So the Treasurer is being directly relevant, and he has the call.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, I see these three parts of my answer as equally important. First of all, there is a future for cash in our economy. Second of all, we put a lot of effort to ensuring that cash can continue to circulate in our whole country and not just parts of our country. And as I indicated to the member for Calare privately and happy to share publicly, we are prepared to consider the proposal that he's put forward in his bill. I indicated to him some level of caution and concern about big penalties for small businesses who are already under a substantial amount of pressure. But as always, with crossbench members in good faith, we see what we can do to accommodate the views that are put to us in a considered way, as your bill has been put forward in a considered way, and I look forward to working with him on it.
Anyone interested can see me later. Order. I give the call to the member for Higgins.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. What is the Albanese Labor government's approach to lowering energy bills after a decade of failed policies? How does this compare with other approaches, and why is it important to be upfront with the Australian people?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question. And of course, the Albanese government's bill relief starts in 1 week's time, the $300, Mr Speaker, on top of the bill relief announced in the budget before last, $300 for every single Australian with an energy bill. No need to fill in a form, no need to apply. It will apply automatically. And of course, Mr Speaker, in the longer term, in the medium and longer term, we know that introducing more of the cheapest form of energy into our energy grid, i.e. renewables, is good for bills. That's why, Mr Speaker, we're pleased that renewable energy is up 25% since we came to office, 8.5 gigawatts. And that plays no small part in the fact that wholesale energy prices, which were $375 a megawatt-hour when we came to office, were in the first quarter of this year $76 a megawatt-hour, Mr Speaker, which is flowing through, as we saw, in the default market offer. And the honourable member asked me what plans we have rejected and why it's important to be up front. Well, we saw the release of what we'll call, to be generous, Mr Speaker, very generous in the spirit of goodwill, a policy last week of nuclear energy. We saw the sites released. 7 sites for nuclear energy, six of which the owners have said they don't want a bar of it, and 5 of which are in states where there's a legislated prohibition. So, Mr Speaker, the policy failed at the first hurdle. But the Leader of the Opposition was asked about the cost of his policy, and I was watching, thinking, well, here we go to get the figures, the details of the cost. And this is what the Leader of the Opposition said. It'll be a big bill, no question about that. Well, that was the detailed cost that we heard from the opposition. A big bill, no question about that. Now, the question for the Leader of the Opposition is, how does a big bill lead to cheaper energy? He hasn't released that, Mr Speaker. It's got the most expensive form of energy available. They think they know better than the CSIRO, but they won't release their costs, although the Leader of the National Party let the cat out of the bag today. He said, we know what they are, we're just not going to tell you. Mr Speaker, on TGB this morning. Yeah, well, we'll get around to telling you when we choose. So, what does all this mean for the Australian people?
Right.
Well, Dr Roger Dargaville, the director of the Monash Energy Institute, has said, well, the impact could be up to $1,000 a year for household electricity bills from nuclear. the former ACCC chairman Rod Sims said, I think it would probably increase household energy costs by well over $1,000 per annum. But better news for the opposition. Dr Dylan McConnell from the University of New South Wales, he had a very different figure. He says only 400 to 500. Only 400 to 500 impact on energy bills, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition says the next election will be a referendum on his nuclear plans. OK, that's fine. Well, if you won't let the Australian people know, they should vote no to his plans, Mr Speaker. If you won't let the Australian people know, they can vote no. Because, Mr Speaker, the Australian people deserve better than the scam they got last week from the Leader of the Opposition. They deserve an energy plan that can work, and that's what this government's delivering.
Before I call the member for Canning, I'll just do a couple of more acknowledgements, but he will get with the call. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the Southern Gallery today are representatives of Bowel Cancer Australia, along with a delegation of patient advocates, reminding everyone it's never too young to be tested, and also a group of students from the Mansfield Secondary College from the electorate of Indi. Welcome to you all. I give the call to the honourable member for Canning.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence. Is it safe for Australian Defence Force personnel to be on nuclear submarines with nuclear propulsion systems?
Give the order. Give the member for O'Connor. If you're trying to help, you're not helping. Give the call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And this is a question now in a series that have been asked by the honourable member, which is trying to draw some equivalence between nuclear-powered submarines and the civil nuclear industry. Now, the short answer to the honourable member's question is it will be safe to serve on a nuclear-powered submarine. But whilst those opposite are trying to have some kind of culture war between nuclear and non-nuclear, at the end of the day, this is about economics, because this is economically insane what they are seeking to do. To draw an equivalence between 8 nuclear reactors, which will power 8 single machines, against nuclear reactors which those opposite are proposing, which are meant to be powering cities.
The Deputy Prime Minister will pause. The member for Canning, I'm just going to give you some free advice, if I may. The Deputy Prime Minister has answered the question. He's remaining on topic about the issue. It is going to be difficult to raise a point of order on relevance. Well, you don't need to, so resume your seat. Yeah. So if he hadn't answered the question or was straying into other territory, I just remind everyone, we're not getting into this habit of just because you don't like the answer, taking a point of order. 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 That's for everyone across the chamber. Deputy Prime Minister in continuation.
Speaker, to try and draw an equivalence between 8 sealed nuclear reactors, which will be powering 8 single machines, and civil nuclear reactors, which those opposite are proposing, which are intended to power cities, is like drawing a comparison between a car engine and a coal-fired power station because they both burn hydrocarbons. The two instruments could not be more different. Those opposite are talking about using the nuclear waste facility that will be developed for AUKUS, when the first of those reactors is not due to go out of service, will not need to be disposed of until the early 2050s, when those opposite are trying to say that we should be heading towards zero net emissions by 2050. The reality is that their civil nuclear power stations will be generating tonnes of—
The Deputy Prime Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
That's Mr Speaker. The question—
No, order.
The question—
There was no point of order before. The Deputy Leader is entitled—
The question was very tight. It was about the safety on nuclear submarines, not broader nuclear policy. I ask you that you bring the Deputy Prime Minister back to the question.
Order. We're just going to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. He was asked a question about safety on the nuclear submarines with nuclear propulsion systems. Just going to make sure his answer is relevant to that question. Obviously, he'll be able to talk about nuclear energy of some sort because that was in the question. Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. They've made their announcement on a nuclear power industry, and on day one of question time, they no longer want to talk about it. That is where they have got to with their policy. And you want to raise a question about safety.
Order.
The entirety of the nuclear cycle forms part of the question of safety. So it is directly relevant in terms of the question that was asked by the honourable member. Now, the fact of the matter is we will not need to be disposing of a nuclear reactor until the early 2050s. They are proposing a nuclear industry which will be generating tonnes of high-level nuclear waste well before that if they want to have making any impact to zero net emissions by 2050. Mr Speaker, you can talk about a culture war between nuclear and non-nuclear. At the end of the day, the critical issue here is that what they are proposing is economic insanity. At a time when we have high energy bills, they are pursuing the single highest source of energy on the planet, and they are unable to tell us how much it will cost, when it will come to pass, or even how much power it will produce.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government tracking when it comes to ticking off renewable energy projects? How will these projects make energy cleaner and cheaper for all Australians? And how is the government's approach different to other proposals?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Thank you so much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Chisholm for her question. I know that she and her constituents, like most Australians, are great supporters of renewable energy, and that's because the energy transition is real and it's happening already. We've already seen a 25% increase in renewable energy in our power grid, and that's because renewable energy is cheaper, it's getting cheaper all the time, and more renewables in the grid means cheaper power bills for Australians. As the member for Chisholm said, we are ticking off those renewable energy projects at record rates. We're outstripping coal and gas projects 7-1, and we've got a record number of renewable energy projects before me in the approval pipeline. I've already approved 54 renewable energy projects in just over 2 years. That is enough to power more than 3 million Australian homes, and incidentally, it's more power than you'd get from 8 large nuclear reactors. So what we have before us is a choice between a renewable energy transition that's already underway or a nuclear fantasy that may never happen. Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition's plan, if you could call it that, is a recipe for delay and it's a recipe for higher bills. They had 10 years in government, 10 years of chaos and delay with 22 energy policies. They didn't land one, and now we're expected to believe that 23 is a charm. 23 is the one that's going to get them there. It is fanciful. They were told during their time in government that 24 coal-fired power stations were closing. And how did they prepare for that? Well, the answer is they didn't. They had almost a decade to prepare. They did nothing to prepare for those closures. And now we're supposed to believe that this uncosted, press release of a policy is somehow going to fix the problem. It's been estimated to cost $600 billion by the Smart Energy Council. The Nationals tell us that they know what it's going to cost. They're just not going to share that with the Australian taxpayers who are paying for it. The reason they won't share the costings is because they know Australian taxpayers would rather spend $600 billion on hospitals, roads and schools than on nuclear reactors. Nuclear energy is expensive. It's getting more expensive all the time. Renewables are already cheaper. They are getting cheaper all the time. There is a reason that more than 3 million Australian households have put solar on the roof. It's because it's cheaper.
Order.
We want to see lower emissions and lower costs.
Concluded. A call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Defence. Australia is in the process of acquiring a fleet of 8 nuclear-powered submarines under the AUKUS agreement. As part of this agreement, Australia will be responsible for the management of spent fuel from the submarine reactors. Deputy Prime Minister, will this nuclear waste be stored in Australia? If so, where?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for his question. And as we announced in March of last year, when we announced the optimal pathway for acquiring a nuclear-powered submarine capability in this country, we made clear that we would be responsible for the disposal of the nuclear waste, as I referred to in the answer to the last question that was asked by the Shadow Minister for Defence. We have also made clear that we will be announcing in the coming months a process by which the site will be established for the disposal of the nuclear waste. The point to be made here, as I made in the answer to the previous question, is that the first nuclear reactor which will need to be disposed of will be due for disposal in the early 2050s. In answer to the question of spent fuel rods, it is a sealed nuclear reactor, and so there are no spent fuel rods. It does not need to be refuelled, and so the first time we will need to be disposing of high-level nuclear waste will be in the early 2050s. And so, yes, we do have time to go through a process of determining where that site will occur. The one point we have made, which we made again in March of last year, was that it will occur on defence land. Now, again, Mr Speaker, what we have is a set of questions which are trying to draw an equivalence between how we operate 8 nuclear reactors in respect of 8 single machines and how those opposite might seek to establish a civil nuclear industry with power stations which are intended to power cities. And it is like comparing a car engine with a coal-fired power station because they both burn hydrocarbons. That is the silliness of the comparison that they are engaging in. But the reason that so many differences apply here is best illuminated by the question of nuclear waste, because for those to establish power stations in any kind of time frame which would have any dint on getting to zero net emissions by 2050 would see tonnes of high-level nuclear waste needing to be disposed of in the 2030s and the 2040s. I repeat, the first nuclear reactor under AUKUS that we will need to dispose of will be in the early 2050s. This is precisely why those opposite have absolutely no idea of what they're talking about. What they need to be telling the Australian people is how much does it cost, when is it coming, and how much power will it produce? And in the absence of answering those questions, all they have for the Australian people is a lemon.
Call to the order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the honourable member for Blair.
My question, Speaker, is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. After a decade of wages being kept deliberately low, how is the Albanese Labor government easing cost-of-living pressures by helping people to earn more and keep more of what they earn?
Call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Blair for the question and also thank him for the opportunity in his electorate during the break to meet with workers at Good Start, early childhood education workers, all of whom were aware that 2 things are about to happen, and now they're only 7 days away, which is people are going to be earning more and keeping more of what they earn. Because they had a government that wanted them to earn more and keep more than what they earn, when those opposite were voting against the changes to the law for people to earn more and were complaining about the changes to the law for people to get tax cuts. 7 days' time. For people on minimum wages and awards, 2.6 million of them get a pay rise, energy bill relief for every household and a tax cut for every taxpayer. Now, people should have a look at their pay slip, the last one they get for this month. A lot of people will have one that goes across both financial years, and so it'll be the one after that, which probably for August for some people or late July, where there will be a substantial difference on what goes into people's bank accounts. That difference, if you're a minimum wage earner The combination of the tax cut and the pay rise means that $38 more as a full-timer will be going into your bank account every week. If you're a cleaner or a retail worker, $40 more will be going into your bank account every week because of the pay rise coupled with the tax cut. For registered nurses and aged care workers, into their bank account, because of the tax cut combined with the pay rises, $50 a week extra going into their pay packets. This is how you help people with cost of living, not by pushing up energy prices with expensive nuclear reactors.
Order.
You actually back people's wages. You take action where you can on doing something about different prices, but the last thing you do is push energy prices up with expensive nuclear reactors. It's not just workers on minimum wages and awards who benefit. Under this government, because of changes made to the law, under the Albanese Labor government, there are 360,000 extra workers on enterprise agreements. Take workers at Linfox and Toll Global Express. Now, almost 10,000 truck drivers there and other transport workers, their pay rise also comes through on the same day that the tax cut comes through. A standard rate of pay for a driver there is about $85,000 a year. They'll be getting $75 a week more into their bank account every week. When people are under pressure, they need a government that will back them to get pay rises and that will take action on prices that doesn't push them further up, which is exactly what expensive nuclear reactors do.
Call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, and I refer to the Deputy Prime Minister's earlier answer and confirmation that waste from the nuclear propulsion system will be stored on the submarine in the reactor for many years. Can the Minister confirm, can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that it is safe for the sailors, for the submariners, to be in that environment?
Order. 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 The Minister for Home Affairs and the Minister for Infrastructure. The Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, if she continues to interrupt, will be warned. Just want the House to come to order. The Leader of the Opposition was heard in silence. This continual interjecting on my right has to stop, otherwise I'll be issuing a general warning to members on my right. Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question, and for his benefit I'll try and take this slowly. There is 8 sealed nuclear reactors which are going to be utilised for the nuclear-powered submarines that the Navy will operate. What a sealed nuclear reactor means is that for the life of the reactor it does not need to be refuelled, and so it exists within the reactor. When the reactor is disposed of is the first moment that there is a need to dispose of high-level nuclear waste.
The order. The Minister for Home Affairs, the Minister for the member for Robertson will see introducing the Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's on relevance, and perhaps to be of assistance to the Minister. The propulsion system burns energy. That's how the system is working, and it's stored
resume your seat. Resume your seat. Yeah. You don't have the call. The microphone's not on. Order. Order. Just the Leader of the Opposition is getting into the habit of abusing the standing orders. There's not an excuse to get up and just give a statement. He knows that. Out of the respect I have for his office, order, and it is not in order to raise other material. Look, it's going to be really simple. If this behaviour continues, I don't have to take points of order, as other speakers have done, and if people abuse the standing orders, they'll immediately leave. So just setting for the next 2 weeks how things are going to roll. So the Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, actually, it doesn't burn any fuel. because burning is oxidisation, which is what happens in an internal combustion engine, which is exactly what happens when you use hydrocarbons. What this is a nuclear reaction which gives rise to power.
Order.
So that is actually what happens inside the sealed nuclear reactor. The point is that the waste that will need to be disposed of was there to be disposed of when that reactor has reached its end of life, and that is in the early 2050s. But, Mr Speaker, the point is this. A civil nuclear reactor that is designed to power cities uses fuel rods, and there are spent fuel rods which are not the size of a can of Coke, but are actually measured in tonnes, which will be produced each and every year from the moment that you operate that power station, and it will need to be disposed of as soon as that occurs. And if these reactors that the Leader of the Opposition is proposing for a civil nuclear industry is to have any impact at all on achieving zero net emissions by 2050, then we are talking about those reactors being in place in the 2030s and the 2040s, which means we're talking about tonnes of waste in the 2030s and the 2040s. We are talking about the need to dispose of our first spent nuclear reactor in the early 2050s.
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Minister for Regional Development is now warned. This free-for-all on day one is not acceptable. Members on my right need to show some more restraint so I can hear. The member for Bendigo has been on her feet and she deserves to be heard in silence. She has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government providing cost of living relief for early childhood education and care workers who play a crucial role in the care for and educating of our youngest Australians?
Give a call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister
Thank you
for
very
Youth.
much, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member for Bendigo for her question and for her continued and ongoing advocacy for early childhood workers in her electorate of Bendigo. Now, Mr Speaker, Labor knows that people are under pressure and are doing it tough, and that's why our number one priority is delivering real cost of living relief for Australians without adding to inflation. This is not just something that we say, Mr Speaker. We've already delivered affordable early learning for more than 1 million families across the nation. And we're ensuring that early childhood workers can earn more and keep more of what they earn. Now, since coming into government and since our Prime Minister stood up and said he absolutely supports an increase to the minimum wage, this government has supported not one, not two, but 3 wage increases for low-paid workers, and that includes workers in feminised industries like early childhood education and care. And the latest increase from the annual wage review will see 2.6 million workers right across Australia better off. Early childhood workers who do really highly skilled and important work, as everybody here I'm sure knows, will receive a 3.75% pay rise from next week. Because, Mr Speaker, on this side of the chamber, we see decent wages as part of the solution to the cost of living challenge, not part of the problem. Now, from next week, we're also delivering a tax cut for every single Australian taxpayer. Now, what does that mean for an early childhood educator? Labor's tax cuts, along with the wage increases, mean this. They mean an extra $109 per week back into their pockets. We know that's going to make a huge difference to them, Mr Speaker. But we also know that that's how you deliver cost of living relief. That's how you do it. That's how you deliver cost of living relief, not by pushing up power prices with nuclear reactors. And we know that what we've done is making a real difference, but we know there's more to be done. And I'm proud to say that this government has made an historic commitment to contribute funding towards a wage increase for early childhood workers. because properly valuing our early childhood education workers means that we can retain and attract the workforce that we need to deliver our vision for a universal early childhood education and care sector. And let me be very clear here, Mr Speaker. Only Labor have a vision for early childhood education and care, one that's good for parents, one that's good for children and good for our economy.
Give the call to the honourable member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, my community of North Sydney believes that our current housing and homelessness crisis is exacerbated by a lack of long-term leadership, thinking, commitment and ambition. They also believe that access to housing is a fundamental human right. Prime Minister, do you believe that access to housing is a fundamental human right? And if yes, why won't you protect that right by legislating a national housing and homelessness plan?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for North Sydney for her question. I certainly believe that access to housing is a fundamental right in an advanced society such as ours. And I know that the security which having a roof over your head gives you is a precondition for being able to seek employment, for being able to enjoy the opportunities that are there by getting an education at university or TAFE or school, of looking after your family. And that certainty that is provided, as someone who grew up in public housing, that certainty that it provided for me and my mum was really important in being able to actually think ahead and to have that security. So we certainly believe that, and that's why we've undertaken, under my government, the most significant housing reforms in a generation. Our comprehensive Home for Australia plan is backed by $32 billion of new housing initiatives. New housing initiatives on top of that, the support that we have with the second consecutive increase in rental assistance, but also our plan for increased social and community housing funding through the Social Housing Accelerator, through the Housing Australia Future Plan, through the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement with the states and territories, our additional funding for housing for women and children escaping domestic violence that's been a part of the National Cabinet debate that we had recently. We know that this is a big challenge, and the key to that is supply. We need to increase supply, which is why we've also provided an incentive for state and territory governments on planning to make sure that increased houses with increased density where appropriate can occur. We can't continue to just think that this will solve itself. We do need strong government action. In addition to that, of course, we have our build-to-rent incentives, which are the subject of some debate in the parliament at the moment, as is our Help to Buy scheme, which is currently before the Senate. We want to help people to home ownership, and a shared equity scheme is something that's worked very effectively from states and territories. A national scheme will be even more effective going forward. So I will certainly continue to work, I'm sure, with the member for North Sydney in whatever capacity we work as we go forward, and to work with people across the parliament to try and achieve these objectives. And I just call upon the Senate this week to take the opportunity to vote for housing initiatives in the Senate.
Concluded. Give a call to the member for Robertson.
And my question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to deliver cost of living relief in the education portfolio, and how does this compare to other approaches?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the sensational member for Robertson, for his question. There are more than 300,000 teachers right across the country, and for a teacher on, say, $80,000 a year, they'll get a tax cut of $1,679 next week. That's double what they would have got under the Liberals. That's how you deliver real cost of living relief, not by jacking up power prices with expensive nuclear reactors. And that's just one example of the difference a Labor government makes. Here's a few more. Under the Liberals, childcare out-of-pocket costs went through the roof. Under us, they've gone down. Under them, they ripped billions of dollars out of public schools. We are putting billions of dollars back in. Under them, attendance at school went down. Under us, it's coming back up. Under them, the number of people studying teaching at university went down. Under us, it's coming back up. Under them, TAFE was neglected and sidelined. Under us, 350,000 Australians have now got access to those important fee-free TAFE courses. And under them, they tried to make people pay for those fee-free university-ready courses, those courses that are a bridge between school and university. Now, I've told members before about the impact that these courses make and told stories of Australians who've done them. Here's another one. I'll give you another one, member for Bradfield. Let me give you the example of Joanne McCarthy. She might be someone known to you. I think she's known to everyone in the press gallery. She's the Gold Walkley winning journalist who exposed institutionalised child abuse in the Hunter region. Her work sparked a royal commission, and before she was a journalist, she did one of these fee-free university-ready courses at Newcastle University. It's what set it all up. Now, Mr Speaker, guess who tried to impose a $3,000 fee on everybody doing those free courses? The Liberal Party. And, Mr Speaker, we're keeping them free and we're expanding the number of Australians who get a chance to do them. In fact, we want to double the number of Australians doing them over the next 15 years. And that's the difference between the Liberals and Labor. They think education is a cost. We see it as an investment. And we understand that teachers are at the core of it, that they are the ones that make all of this possible. That's why I said a minute ago a teacher on 80 grand a year will get a tax cut of $1,679.
Give a call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Minister. When does the government expect green hydrogen to be commercially viable?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, one of the things about green hydrogen is that the world is looking to the opportunity that will come from the creation of green hydrogen. And the great advantages that we have compared with countries like Japan and Korea is space. So we can create, through having large-scale solar and wind projects that can create—
Order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. Order. Members on my Members on my left. The Leader of the Opposition—
Horse is off and running, Mr Speaker.
The Prime Minister will just pause a sec. There's far too much noise. This continual noise is too much. A general warning is now issued, so that means if anyone interjects, they will just leave immediately. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence, just as the questioner was given the respect of being heard in silence. Here's the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. So the world is looking towards green hydrogen as making a major contribution to the shift towards net zero by 2050, whether it be in Asia or in Germany with the agreements that we've signed in cooperation and research, whether it be the investment where investors are queuing up to invest here in Australia, to invest their own money, Mr Speaker, not taxpayers' money. So one of the things that we're talking about—
Order. Members on my left. The member for O'Connor is now warned.
One of the things we're talking about with green hydrogen, as opposed to their nuclear reactor plan, is private sector investment. That's right. And one of the things that we've done with our support that was announced in the budget for green hydrogen and critical minerals is because of the way that it's designed. It's designed to reward success. Reward success. So it's only when it succeeds that there is taxpayer incentive for private sector investment. And that draws a big contrast, Mr Speaker.
Order. The member for Moreton. The member for Fairfax on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Purposely wrote this very tightly, and I'll repeat it. It's on relevance.
Yeah.
When does the government expect green hydrogen to be commercially viable?
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Yeah. Just as we've had through the course of question time, you would like a date and an exact time and an answer. But under the déjà vu, under the standing orders, there's no compulsion for me to, under the standing orders, or ability to get the Minister or the Prime Minister to answer exactly the way he is talking about the topic. He is being directly relevant about order. The Leader of the Opposition. Oh, no, the member for Fairfax will leave the chamber under 94A. We're not. Prime Minister in continuation.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. One of the great distinctions now, and I didn't think when I first came to this place I'd say this, but this side of the House, the Labor Party, believe in working with the business community, believe in private sector investment. That side of the House have adopted Soviet tactics, Mr Speaker. They want a command economy. It's going to be all funded. The loss will all be there. The taxpayer subsidies will all be there. We're centralised planning, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Which is why they hide the costs, because it simply doesn't stack up. There isn't a single investor, a single bank, a single financial institution, not even their mates, are queuing up to say, I've got some money for nuclear reactors. And that's because it doesn't stack up, which is why they are hiding the costs.
Order. Order. The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme is now warned. Member for Swan has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government continuing to deliver cheaper medicines? How is this helping to deliver cost of living for every Australian after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. First, on indulgence, can I echo your welcome to delegates from Bowel Cancer Australia who've been here today talking to members across the chamber about their personal, powerful stories, and welcome them this afternoon. And I thank the member for Swan also for her question, because 2 years ago she promised her electors in the city of Perth a stronger Medicare. And over the last 2 years, Mr Speaker, we have been busy delivering on that promise through tripling the bulk billing incentive, which in just 7 months has delivered almost 2 million additional free visits to the doctor, Mr Speaker, through our network of urgent care clinics, which has already seen 450,000 patients, every single one of whom have been fully bulk billed, Mr Speaker, and through cheaper medicines. In just the first 3 months of our government, we slashed the maximum amount that millions of pensioners would pay for all of their medicines in a given year by 25%, Mr Speaker. In our first 12 months, we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS. And in our first 18 months, we finally allowed doctors to prescribe common medicines for chronic conditions for 60 days' supply, not just 30. And in 3 months' time, another 100 medicines will be added to that list, which I'm sure the Leader of the Nationals will welcome. And in our first 2 years, Mr Speaker, we've made more than 200 new or expanded listings to the PBS, giving Australian patients access to the best cutting-edge treatments available anywhere in the world at affordable PBS prices. Already, Mr Speaker, Australians have saved more than $400 million from these measures, delivering real help on cost of living. But we know that we can provide even more help, Mr Speaker, which is why in last month's budget this government introduced a freeze on medicine prices for up to 5 years, Mr Speaker, which will save patients another almost $500 million, Mr Speaker. Now, this cost of living relief would be important at any time, Mr Speaker, but as the member for Swan says, it is particularly important coming on the back of a decade of cuts and neglect to Medicare, which of course were kicked off by the Leader of the Opposition's famous horror health budget from a decade, Mr Speaker, along with cuts to hospital funding and a GP tax for every visit to the doctor, Mr Speaker. This man tried to make medicines more expensive, not cheaper, more expensive, by jacking up the price by up to $5 a script. Well, that's not our approach, Mr Speaker. It's not one he's ever disowned, but it's not our approach, Mr Speaker. Better bulk billing arrangements, cheaper medicines. That's how you deliver real cost of living relief. Not through a GP tax, Mr Speaker, not through more expensive medicines, and certainly not by pushing up power prices through nuclear reactors.
Order. Give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. The Greens-led inquiry into supermarkets said price gouging should be illegal and obscene profiteering should stop. But all Labor has done today is make Coles and Woolies agree to a code they were prepared to sign up to anyway. Prime Minister, how much cheaper will groceries now be? Or is Labor just tinkering around the edges again with a code that will be good for farmers but do nothing for consumers, instead of just making price gouging illegal?
Call to the Treasurer.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member for Melbourne might not be interested in a fairer go for farmers and families, but we are on this side of the House. And the difference between the member for Melbourne and this government is
Treasurer will pause. The member for Barker will assist the chamber by leaving. The Treasurer in continuation.
Mr Speaker, the member for Melbourne, his main job is to issue angry press releases about the action that the government is taking to get a fair go for farmers and families, to make sure that we're making what was a voluntary code mandatory, dramatically increasing the penalties and providing bigger and better avenues for people to make complaints and have those resolved, Mr Speaker. Now, I would have thought, even in a world where the Greens political party wants the Labor government to go further than we have, I would have thought at the very least the Greens would welcome the progress that has been made today. And if they were fair dinkum, they would. If they were fair dinkum about what's happening in the supermarket sector, they would welcome these important steps. And they wouldn't stop there, Mr Speaker. They would also welcome the fact that we've empowered the ACCC to play a much more active role in this sector. They'd also welcome the fact that we've funded the consumer group Choice to provide the kind of price transparency that we need in the market. They'd also provide support for our efforts to strengthen and streamline the mergers regime in our economy, Mr Speaker. But the Greens political party, they're not fair dinkum about these issues, and that's because they always prioritise having a Barney with the Labor Party over doing the right thing by consumers. And that's what we're seeing here, and we see that question in this light.
Call to the member for Patterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What approaches to boosting Australia's energy production will help bring costs of living down, and which approaches will make power more expensive? And why has the government chosen cheaper, more reliable energy? And are there any alternatives, Prime Minister?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, whether it's the business community, the Australian energy market operator, consumers, they all know that the best way to bring down prices is to introduce more supply from the cheapest form of new energy, and that is renewables. And that's what the Australian energy market operator has put in its integrated systems plan, that of course costs less than 10% of what they allege that it costs as well. But it's all there on the website, and that was the basis of the plan that we actually took to the election. The integrated systems plan was in place under them. It's just they didn't act on it. But we've acted. We've acted. 43% reduction by 2030, net zero by 2050, the safeguard mechanism, the capacity investment scheme, making sure that we provide appropriate support as well through programs like the Solar Sunshine program, the hydrogen program, the program for batteries as well. That will make a difference for jobs, but also make a difference in reducing energy prices. Now, people who have had a look at this know that that's the case. And that's why earlier today, with the Minister, I announced in a press conference with Matt Keane, who has taken up the position of Chair of the Climate Change Authority. This is a guy who was the New South Wales Treasurer. He was the New South Wales Treasurer and the New South Wales Energy Minister and Environment Minister in a coalition government. That lasted for 3 terms, Mr Speaker, for longer than the last coalition government did their opposite. At the same time as serious policies were being introduced, they had 22 policies and didn't land one of them. But none of the 22 had nuclear as part of the system. And indeed, even last year you had the Leader of the Opposition saying he was opposed to large reactors. He said this on the 2nd of March as a birthday present for me. He said this: "I don't support the establishment of big nuclear facilities here at all. I'm opposed to it." Not ancient history, Mr Speaker. Last year. And why? Because experts say it'll push up power bills by $1,000. It'll cost hundreds of billions of dollars, at least 8 times more than solar or wind. It will only deliver, according to Grattan, about 3.7% of the energy that we need. 6 of the 7 sites have said no. They can't even get the support of the Queensland LNP leader to remove the ban that is in place, or any of the other Liberal leaders around the country, or even the National Party leaders in places like Victoria. And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.